welcome to Tim Conley Drums. Now, this is an educational channel, and I educate obviously in music, and I educate on the drums, and I also like to do motivational speaking, and I try to motivate people to do things and motivate people to uplift themselves and all sort of things. So, being an educational channel, sometimes I like to veer off the path a little bit. I try and take what I'm going to tell you today, or I'm going to try and take what I'm going to tell you today and link it into music because it absolutely fits. Okay. One of the things that drummers always talk about, and it's been a proven thing, is that drummers have quite often, there's always exceptions, people. Don't shoot the messenger. Drummers often have a high IQ. This is a scientifically proven fact. I'm not just saying that because I'm a drummer and I'm biased. Scientifically proven fact that drummers have a higher IQ. Now, what exactly is an IQ? What does it mean? IQ stands for intelligent quotient, a score determined by standardized tests that are designed to assess an individual's intelligence. The tests were originally created to evaluate a person's cognitive abilities relating to reasoning and logical problem solving. There are a number of IQ tests that can be used. One of the most common is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. Most people will score in the range of 85 to 114, with anything above 115 seen as above average. Those scoring 145 and beyond are considered in the genius range. Wow, very interesting. Now, an IQ obviously is important. People judge people, especially in higher education fields, based on their IQ. But I'm here today to tell you something in terms of getting a job or being successful as a musician, because I'm going to turn this over now to music and explain where I'm going with this. One thing that's extremely, extremely important about being a musician, because some musicians are absolutely brilliant, and whether they score, in the average or above average intelligent range, or they go to the genius level, they have incredible ability, and they're very smart people. There's no doubt about that. But there's another element of this whole IQ thing, and it's called EQ. Now, what is EQ? EQ stands for emotional quotient, or emotional intelligence. It determines an individual's ability to identify emotions, both their own and that of others. It is a common belief that people with a high EQ make better leaders because of their ability to understand and connect with those around them. People that have a high level of emotional intelligence often do well in leadership roles and display excellent teamwork abilities. They are able to perceive the emotions of others and often have strong empathy, usually resulting in good self-awareness and social skills. Turn this over to music. How many times have you guys come on that watch me regularly, and I've talked about so many stories about, difficult things happening and weird things happening, and the singer gets drunk and this guy does that and this guy goes to jail and whatever, all the craziness over 40 years of my career, 40 years plus. But there's one thing that I haven't talked about, and that's EQ. And the EQ, the ability to understand yourself, self-awareness, being aware and of others and their emotions, and social skills. Highly, highly important if you're going to be a musician, because getting along in a band can be one of the most difficult things if you lack or have a low EQ. So you can have the highest EQ. You can be the most talented musician on the planet with the highest EQ. But if you have no EQ or low EQ, you're not going to succeed because nobody's going to want to play with you. Simple as that. It's just like on the playground. Nobody is going to want to play with you. No one's going to want to be in a band. And I know guys, I'm not going to name any names, but I know several musicians, local musicians that I know personally, that have very low EQ. And as a result, they don't play in any bands hardly at all. One person in particular that I'm thinking of is a genius, absolutely brilliant drummer. But you ever hear him on stage anywhere? You ever see him play anywhere? Hardly ever. He does have a band that he has put together, and God knows how these people can tolerate him, to be totally honest. But they do, and they do play around a little bit. But he barely plays any gigs. He's not doing 100 shows, 150 shows a year like what I've done in the past, or what a lot of musicians do. They're constantly working. Because of the low EQ and his inability to function with other people, quite frankly, he doesn't get much work. It's as simple as that. Now, like I said, I know several people that are musicians that are in this field that cannot get work. So they're just either teaching, which can also be difficult for them in some cases, because again, it's hard for them to reach out to their students sometimes if they have low EQ. And some of them, they play, but they have to work some kind of another job. They cannot work full time as a musician because they're not making any money, because they can't teach, because they can't respond to the student. They can't play with anybody in a band situation because they can't respond to their other musicians. Okay, so moving on, research has shown that EQ is a better predictor of success than IQ, or technical skills. Individuals with high EQ focus on the positive, listen before making decisions, admit mistakes, show empathy, and deal appropriately and maturely with negative emotions. These are extremely important elements of the EQ. Now, why is EQ so important to employers, including musician employers? Well, they make for better teammates, plain and simple. And that's the most important thing to me in music. And I'm going to tell you a story quickly. I've been looking for a keyboard player because I restarted my old band, but we've been trying to find a keyboard player. So far, I've interviewed, without even hearing them play, not a single note. I've interviewed 17 potential keyboardists. And I'm not knocking keyboard players. I'm sure I'm sure all of them were probably good players. I didn't hear one of them play. I interviewed them based on EQ abilities, literally. I wanted to see their personalities. I wanted to see, can I go on tour with this guy? Can I spend 3 nights in a hotel with this guy? Forget about being on stage, because that's such a short period of time. What I'm talking about is, can I stand being around this person in longer extended period of time, even for a night? Can I handle this person on the gig, off stage, in between shows, at rehearsal, at photo shoots, at video shoots, at whatever functions the band attends, whatever social functions that the band put on and or attend? Am I going to be embarrassed by this guy talking to fans? Am I going to be embarrassed by this guy talking to agents? Am I going to be embarrassed by this guy just being around my family? My family's like, man, that guy's weird. Why is he in the band? I don't want any of that. I want a guy that I know I can rely on, that stands up for what's morally right and has my interests as band leader and the rest of the band members, all their interests in his mind and in his head, not self-interest. Because ultimately, I believe the band is a team, and the 4 or 5 of you, if we're adding a keyboard player, the 5 of us move as a group. There isn't this element. Of course, you're gonna have solos and stuff like that, where the guitar player, the bass player, the drummer, whatever the keyboardist stands out for a moment, or an a cappella section for a singer, where they stand out for the moment. But as a whole, my goal is to get the band to sound amazing as a group. And my goal as the drummer is to make everybody else sound good. How do you make everybody else sound good? Not just with your own good playing, but you make the rest of the band sound good and relax by letting them know that they're safe on stage with me. They know that they can settle into a groove and they don't have to worry about it fluctuating like crazy. And they don't have to worry about, especially the singer, that I'm going to overplay or overfill or use ridiculous polyrhythmic or crossing over the bar line or metric modulation type phrases when it's not appropriate. Now, in appropriate moments, do all that fancy stuff. It's amazing. Amazing. I love that stuff. I love to play it. I love playing an odd time and then crossing over the bar line. Vinny a la Vinny Colaiuta. But you got to use it wisely and appropriately. So anyways, 17 piano players. Have I hired anybody? No. And like I said, no one's even played for me. Out of the 17, I liked in terms of their personality and whatnot. Now it turns out in the hiring process, I did a second interview with them, and neither one of them is going to be available for the time periods that I'm looking at working and whatnot. So I had to eliminate those two because they're doing other things, they're busy, whatever. So 15 of them I downright rejected just because I just didn't care for their personalities, and I didn't care for, there was a couple of them that just wouldn't stop talking. Now, some of you are going to say, well, you don't stop talking. But what am I going to do? There's going to be a tumbleweed going through here. If I don't talk in a video, I have to talk in a video. I have no choice. Otherwise, you guys are going to get pretty bored with me. That's going to get pretty boring pretty quick. So I have no choice but to talk. But when a couple of them, they just talked my ear off. It's technically an interview. I'm asking questions, but I couldn't get the questions in. So immediately I thought, I can't be around this person because I can't stand being around people that talk too much or they think they know it all. Know-it-alls are the worst. All right. Another thing about high EQ, it leads to more effective communication, which a lot of these people did not show me. Effective communication is not just talking, it's listening. Listening is huge, huge. I believe the smartest people and the people with the highest IQ and EQ are listeners. I like to listen. When I know that somebody knows more about something than me, I shut up and I let them talk. Dom Famularo, when I studied with him and he was talking about motions and how to play certain strokes and how to do this and how to do that and all music and drum related things, I'd ask questions, but I would listen intently. Another guy, Alan Cross. Alan Cross, for those of you that remember him, had a show on the radio station CFNY years ago about the ongoing history of music. The guy is a brilliant, brilliant guy. And whenever I've ran into him in various studios, I usually meet him in studios, even though I did one time I was involved in an interview and he was one of the people that was being interviewed while I was there. And when Alan talks, everybody shuts up, because when he's talking about music and the history of music and he's telling you things, you just listen, because the man is brilliant, and you just be quiet and listen to what he has to say and take it all in. And I believe that's a sign of intelligence. When you run into some guy somewhere and he's telling you about everything and he knows it all and he's an expert and this and that, 9 times out of 10, the guy's a BSer. He doesn't know it all. He's making it up on the fly. The funny thing is, though, when I run into a BSer and he's talking about music, well, I confront him right away. And I'm like, I don't think that's right, man. And then I will present the facts, provided I know them, of course. But a guy like Alan, I've seen him tear people apart because he's so smart and so with it. In music. Dom Famularo too. I never saw him tear anybody apart, but he would stand up to people who would say things that he knew were not true or were incorrect. 100%. I did see him do that. He didn't tear them apart because that wasn't part of his personality, because of all the people I ever knew in my life, Dom Famularo had the highest EQ. He was also a very high IQ guy as well. I don't know what his level was, but his EQ level was off the charts, in my opinion, and in thousands of other people's opinion that ever knew Dom Famularo. He was a brilliant, brilliant man, and he had the EQ factors to the 100th degree, you know? Another thing about having high EQ is it's more resilient, because when you're being attacked rather than reacting and screw you, man, and or taking out a weapon and stabbing them, and then you spend the rest of your life in jail because you killed somebody over you didn't like their hat. You don't like my Canada hat, so you try and kill me. It's ridiculous. A lot of low IQ and low EQ, more so. Low EQ people are reactionary. People that have high EQ are resilient. So when they are being verbally assaulted, they can rationalize the assault and even be compassionate. Dom Famularo told me a story once about how a guy got so angry at him because he thought Dom stole his parking spot. Well, 10 minutes outside of their vehicles, the first minute the guy wanted to kill Dom, the 10th minute, he was practically crying on his shoulder and hugging him because Dom had this incredible way of calming down situations, and his resiliency to negativity, again, was on the absolute highest of levels. Okay, so EQ essentially consists of 4 components: self-awareness, social awareness, managing relationships, and emotional management. So let's talk about self-awareness first. Self-awareness is emotional intelligence involving being extremely self-aware. That means that recognizing your own emotions and identifying your triggers and hot buttons. Take a moment to consider your personality. How do you manage conflicts or disputes or disappointment? How do you communicate or collaborate with others? Self-awareness helps you gain a deep understanding of how you react to your emotions and how your emotions impact others. It's vitally important to understand and be self-aware and not create awkwardness. A lot of people, they're completely self-unaware. They don't realize that the way they're standing, the way they're talking, the way they're looking, the way they're behaving is creating problems for other people. They're completely unaware. So being self-aware is a very important component of EQ. Another very important part of EQ, or having a high EQ, is social awareness. Social awareness involves having empathy and the capacity to recognize the feelings of others. It also involves understanding that one thing can be seen from various perspectives. Do you remember the virtual phenomenon from about 2015 about the dress? People who viewed a picture of a party dress disagreed on whether the dress was black, blue, white, or gold, or white and gold, I should say. It is actually blue, by the way. The controversy left us wondering, how can we look at the same thing and see something different? Anyone who has ever had an argument with a teenager or a disagreement with a partner or a conflict with a boss already knows that people have multiple ways of understanding the same situation. EQ is not just knowing that people see things differently, but appreciating that others interpret and understand from their own unique perspective. So being aware of or being socially aware, the old saying, he's going to argue that the sky isn't blue. Some people are completely socially unaware, and it creates, again, that level of anxiety and frustration in people. And social awareness allows you, high EQ with social awareness at the highest level, makes you able to understand and be aware of things that maybe other people aren't aware of, being able to give a different perspective on things and pointing out to them if something is in fact blue, like the study about this dress, pointing out, well, you see it as red and gold, I see it as blue, here's why I see it as blue. I don't really understand that exactly, but that example is an extreme example. But another thing is, sometimes people manipulate words and thoughts because they have an agenda. Social awareness, people are going to be more inclined to be truthful in their regurgitation of a story. So for example, let's say somebody witnessed a crime. Well, let's say one of the people has no actual involvement in it, so they've got nothing to gain. They're just going to tell the truth. Here's what I saw. Let's say another person saw the exact same thing as the first person, but the second person might have some kind of involvement in the crime and or knows the person that committed this crime or some kind of involvement, they're going to tell a different story because the story that they tell, they believe benefits them or benefits the criminal. That's one example. Another example is just people see things sometimes differently because they already have a projected image or thought in their mind of how this should be. When they're presented with the facts of how it's different, they have a very difficult time accepting this. Now, guys, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. You all know that. I'm a drummer. but but I research these things. I read these things. I'm very interested in the way the mind works, and I've studied this. I've taken some courses, university courses and whatnot, or not university, sorry, college courses. I took them in music school twice because we had to take courses outside of music. So I can remember taking human psychology. EQ and IQ was a hot topic, and I've studied this. So I have a really deep interest in this. Okay, another element is emotional management. This ability involves managing your emotions and keeping impulses under control by addressing negative feelings. Extremely important. Effectively handling challenging emotional states and navigating and coping with stress. This is often easier said than done. Your ability to manage your emotions can be affected by your innate temperament. Influence from your family or culture can affect how well you sense and interpret emotions. What is acceptable to show and how to react to others' emotions. It gets even harder if you're dealing with chronic stress, trauma, or facing discrimination, or working in a hostile environment. Well, guys, I can tell you, I've worked in a hostile environment my whole life. In that hostile environment, there was a lot of situations. You guys have heard a lot of my stories. And in those times, I was able to almost always keep a cool head, level head, and deal with the situations. Now, indirectly, without really getting into it too heavily, again, back to Dom Famularo, he taught me so much about managing people. And if you read his book about positivity and becoming, embracing your super skills as a human being, which is your mouth and your brain, and putting them together and doing and saying things that are going to motivate and inspire other people. If you can use emotional management as a tool in your toolbox to help you deal with very difficult and stressful situations, man, you got EQ at the highest level, because it is very difficult sometimes to manage stressful situations. Now, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I have a very good ability to manage stressful situations. I can remember one time saving my mother's life. It's a very touchy subject, but my mother went into cardiac arrest, and I was there, and I performed CPR on her, and I saved her. She survived I knew CPR. I've trained in CPR, and I have to take CPR training again, actually, because I'm going to be teaching at a music camp this summer, and I have to have CPR again. But yeah, so my mother required CPR. I gave it to her unbelievably, because CPR is not the be all and end all. Normally, it doesn't even work, to be totally honest. I mean, it's a tool that you can use, and hopefully it works. Luckily, it did work for my mother at the time. Unfortunately, she passed away a short time later. But in that moment, even though my mother is literally dying in front of me, I was able to keep my shit together enough that I could perform CPR on her, and she came back and she got to live a little bit longer. Unfortunately, she passed away during open heart surgery, which she had a team of doctors with her, and they couldn't save her once they opened her up and they tried to do a heart valve replacement, and her heart was extremely badly damaged. So it's unfortunate, but she passed away at that time. Anyways, emotional management, keeping your shit together under extremely stressful situations. I know it's difficult, but it's a very, very important skill to have, and especially for people with high EQ that can handle these situations like this. Okay, the last one On the EQ scale, the fourth one I'm going to talk about is managing relationships. To manage your relationships with others, you must improve communications, manage expectations, consider differences in perception, appreciate different working styles, and be positive. Good relationships with others can have a considerable influence on you, on your happiness at home, on your success at work, and your satisfaction with life. This is extremely important. And it's important for us as musicians to be able to manage relationships with each other in the band, with management, with your crew, with any kind of involvement with other bands, crewmates, other bands. I mean, this extends to not outside of music, of course. This expands to all of us being able to manage relationships. You know, some of the greatest guys I ever worked for in terms of being a musician, they all have this skill down, managing people, managing relationships. If you don't have a high EQ and in the ability to manage relationships, your band is going to fail. Guaranteed. You'll never be able to manage and keep your band together. I'll give you an example. There was this bass player that I subbed in on this band, and the band was going through people like crazy. Now, I was subbing in, but they wanted to hire me. I couldn't take the job because I was already playing in two bands and subbing in God knows how many others at the time. Just the fact that I was able to sub in for, I think, 2 nights with this band was a miracle that I wasn't working, because normally I would have been working, but for some reason I wasn't. I don't remember why, but I subbed in, and the guys in the band all told me how they were quitting and that the band goes through people like crazy. And it's because the bass player slash band leader had very low EQ, and he had terrible relationship management skills. On the flip side, I played in bands where the band leader had amazing relationship management skills. And as a result, he had the same band members for long, long periods of time. And me being one of them. Also subbing in various bands where I've heard about how the band leader's a great guy and he manages the band really well. Now, in the big music world, Billy Idol has had the same band members since day one. Just like the band that my daughter loves, Tokyo Hotel, same band members from day one. ZZ Top, AC/DC, Rush, you name it. Bands, Rolling Stones, only reason I say Rolling Stones is because they're still active. All of those bands actually are still active in terms of us listening to them. But in terms of being on the road and touring, the Rolling Stones are still active. And they've been together forever. They're the longest running band that's still together. I think they formed around the same time as the Beatles back in 1960 or 61 or something like that. And they're still around. It's unbelievable. But those guys obviously have very, very high EQ managing relationship skills. There's no doubt about that. Now, obviously, this extends outside of music. I like to bring it into the music world because that's the world that I live in, and that's the world I know the best. So, anyways, guys, that is EQ and IQ. I didn't really talk about IQ a lot. I definitely focus more on EQ because, as you can tell, people who are extremely successful in business in particular and managing companies, the ones with the highest EQ are the most successful. There's no doubt about it. And it is extremely important to work on and try and develop your EQ. So EQ awareness, that's the story that I'm telling today. All right, guys, thanks very much for joining me. I hope this enlightened you. Look up EQ, research it, read about it, find out more about it the same way that I did. And I hope that this video launches you on a search where you can improve your own EQ. Thanks very much for watching. And as always, keep drumming and keep researching. See ya.